I have a question. Recently, I went to a lecture of another economist, and he maintains that one of our greatest challenges as a nation is that we have lost our focus on long-term benefits and return and have become a nation just looking at short-term. Do you support that? It sounds like some of your statistics, you support that, that issue. But if you do, why do you believe we've done that?
No, I do. Thanks, Pat. And I do think that there is a tremendous danger, particularly when you go through the kind of business interruption. The cycle has affected so many Americans in a very harsh way over the last 2.5 years. And I think coming out of those changes, and for all of us who've lived through multiple cycles, there's a tremendous feeling that we want to know who was responsible. Well, it typically isn't that easy. It typically, there are lots of issues that go on over long time periods that tend to build up growth rates. Inflation starts to move with it. Interest rates increase, and you get a significant crash. And we saw that bubble pop in the residential side after almost 20 years of growth. And so I'd say the short-term issue, it's fueled by so many things. I mean, we're all students of 1 minute in the United States today, whether it's our communications with one another, whether it's what we watch in the news every day, whether it's how we judge ourselves. I personally don't think the big issue is the quarterly earnings issue. I know that was an enormous issue for people speculating what caused all this. Companies have to do well in the short term and the long term. We don't get a buy on that. And the great companies do both. You can't do well just in the short term. You just won't exist. What concerns me, though, is that some of the regulations that are being proposed will encourage the short-term orientation. And let me just give you one example of that. A very important fulcrum for any for-profit company is their board of directors. The board of directors provides tremendous constancy throughout management change. I mean, they know the strategy, they know the key people in terms of succession management, they know what's gone well before, they know what is planned out ahead. And I would maintain that it's very important, while you want some turnover on that board, always have some dynamic new thoughts, you also want some presence of people who've been through it with a couple cycles and know the people, know the investments. One of the proposals that I mentioned, which is the federally mandated proxy access, would say that for all companies, and shareholders don't get to vote on this, for all companies, you will now have access, anybody who owns a certain percentage of shares. Right now it's being debated whether it's between 3 and 5% and holds shares for 2 years, can nominate someone to the board of directors. Now that sounds just fine when you state that. Now you say, well, gee, you're allowed to pool shares, so a group of people can get together to meet that. And the individual doesn't have to be vetted by the nominating committee with all the vetting criterion that we do today to look for conflicts, to look for skill sets, to look for other boards they serve on, whether they have, let me give you an example, if they were the individual who could meet the requirements on your audit committee for Sarbanes-Oxley specialist, and that person got bumped off your audit committee by this person who got elected, the board's still responsible, and they had no role in that. So I'd say sometimes these regulations that sound so attractive when you just hear them, when you get into the practicality of understanding how they work, now that was in the Financial Regulatory Reform Bill. Why it belongs in a Financial Regulatory Reform Bill is still beyond me, but that's where it was. That proposal's been around for 25 years. And a lot of these governance proposals got pushed into these bills that have been pushed through, and they are going to affect how companies do business. My concern about that particular one is it leads to short-termism. Because if directors are going to be elected every year, if they're going to be people who can be constantly thrown into the proxy, all that does is say, boy, as a board of directors, we better be sure we get the stock up this year. And that's important, but it's supposed to be over the long term, not just in that year. And so it starts to lend itself to even more pressure on short-termism at a time we need fundamental investment. That's why energy policy is long-term and important. Tax policy is long-term and important. Education is long-term. These aren't things you can turn on and turn off if you want to have an attractive economic environment.
Good afternoon, Mr. Cutler, and thank you for your leadership in the corporate community. It was referenced earlier, your leadership in Issue 6 last year. On behalf of the bereaved voters of Cuyahoga County, we thank you for allowing us to go to a new system. Just curious, what type of leadership qualities do you be looking for in a new county executive?
Yeah, I've commented in a couple environments, and I have to be a little careful because I want to disclose I'm on the executive committee of the group that's working along with TAG, the Transition Advisory Group, to try to help to come up with recommendations that either the man or woman who is elected as county executive will consider as they think through the process of changing our county government. And as you know, the charter calls for a number of structural changes, and so there's a great deal for he or her to manage when they come into office on day one. Having said that, I think the things we talked about during the campaign for issue 6 last year, or 5 and 6 when they were going on, was that we really think it is very helpful for someone to have had some form of turnaround experience, because this is a very complex county with over 9,000 employees and many different elements to it. More complex than any one of us understands till you really get in and dig in it. We think it's someone who can attract talent, because it's really important to attract great talent into public service, because that's what it's going to take to deal with so many of these challenges that we're all supportive of seeing being addressed successfully. I'd like to see personally someone who's managed a large-scale organization, because I don't think 9,100 employees and a budget up toward $1 billion is a job for someone who hasn't had some of that experience. And so we're very hopeful that we see the breadth of candidates that the community is able then to select the right man or woman to really lead this job, which is so enormously important for our county and becomes a major leader within our state as well.
Good afternoon, Mr. Cutler. My name is Meredith Turner, representing the Office of United States Senator Sherrod Brown. I want you to know that I'm taking great notes here today.
Sherrod and I talk frequently.
You mentioned that jobs should be a priority, and Sherrod is clearly on the same page of that agenda as is indicative of his work right now around a current jobs bill. You alluded to the fact that education should be an opportunity as opposed to a right. And I also work on immigration issues for Senator Brown, and I help a lot of organizations and institutions in the area with issues surrounding H-1B visas, et cetera. And I can't help but to wonder sometimes why we can't fill some of those positions with qualified Americans. Finally, last week my cable box died, and I took it over to Time Warner. I got the new box, and I came back home and I hooked it up, and it didn't work. It said that it hadn't been activated. So I called the number that was going across the screen, and the lady, I learned that she was from Costa Rica, and I just don't understand how Luisa in Costa Rica is benefiting Americans.
I'm not sure which part of that to start. Let me start with the last part. But first, appreciate you being here. And I think to the issue of when you look at jobs, and the Senator and I talked about this specific point about a week ago, is that in any mature economy, I think you have to, where the standard of living is higher than it is in developing economies. We've watched the migration of jobs around the world going back to the old English kingdom when the textiles moved out of the UK. I personally don't believe you can artificially prevent a job from moving. What you can do is create the opportunities for the job to stay or be created. And my own encouragement is that we work much more on that side and not fret as much about what do we do to stop things from moving. That's where I come back to the issues of education and infrastructure are two of the great advantages of developed countries. So we need to make it better, have the best ports, have the best airports, have the best highways, have the best railways, have the best education. And the reason I use the word opportunity versus right is my concern about the pejorative use of the use right is it means we're going to tell people to get education. We can encourage them, we can have that opportunity there for them, but people have got to have the initiative to go get it. And one of the issues we're really trying to encourage people to think about is we have to stop telling people what to do. People will figure it out if we get the right environment out for them, and that's how a capitalist society works over time. I think we're on to the last question. Thank you.
That's right. Thank you. Thank you, President. Today at the City Club of Cleveland, we have been listening to a Friday Forum featuring Alexander Cutler, Chairman and CEO of Eaton Corporation. Thank you, Mr. Cutler. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. This forum is now adjourned.
For information on upcoming speakers or for podcasts of the City Club, go to cityclub.org.